Tonight, we're going to talk about power, according to Machiavelli. Not the loud kind, not the kind that rings through marble halls or rides at the head of an army, but the quiet force that shapes cities, commands loyalty, and survives through storms of ambition. To understand the 10 laws we're about to explore, we need to step, just for a moment, into the world that produced the man who wrote them. Niccolò Machiavelli was born in 1469 in Florence, a city glowing with art, thriving with trade, and trembling under the weight of political uncertainty. He wasn't born into wealth, but into books, into a household where old Latin texts shared space with the smell of baked bread and burning olive wood. His childhood was simple, but the city outside his door was anything but. Guilds argued, factions shifted, allies betrayed allies, and the great families of Florence moved power the way one moves pieces on a chessboard. As a young man, Machiavelli entered the service of the Florentine Republic. He became a diplomat, traveling through courts, palaces, and military camps across Europe. He watched kings make promises they never intended to keep. He observed generals who won battles through luck rather than talent. He sat at tables where every smile hit a sharpened edge. And through all of it, he wrote, he analyzed, he paid attention. Human nature, in all its quiet restlessness, became his lifelong subject. Then everything changed. The Medici returned to power, the Republic fell, and Machiavelli, loyal to the old government, was imprisoned, tortured, and finally exiled from the city he had served for years. He retreated to a small farmhouse in the countryside, a place of silence, dirt paths, and long nights. There, stripped of status and surrounded only by books and memory, he wrote the work that defined him, The Prince, not as a manual for cruelty, but as an attempt to make sense of the world as he had seen it, a world where ideals and reality rarely matched, where human behavior followed patterns older than stone, and where survival demanded clarity, discipline, and calm observation. If we want to understand the 10 laws of power he left behind, we must keep 2 things in mind. First, Machiavelli was not a monster. Second, he was not an optimist. He was simply someone who refused to look away. And tonight, we follow the same path, slowly, quietly, without judgment. Before we begin, if you enjoy these gentle journeys through history, you can like or subscribe, only if it feels right. If you'd like, you can also share where you're listening from tonight. Now, let's take our first step into the world of power. The first law waits in the distance, shaped by everything Machiavelli witnessed in the flickering light of courts, embassies, and battle-worn cities. It begins with a simple truth, one he learned long before exile, long before he picked up his pen, long before the world knew his name. To walk through power, you must first learn to see. Law 1. See the world as it is. Power begins in silence, not in the sound of marching boots or in the rustle of velvet cloaks, but in the quiet moment when a person finally decides to look at the world without filters, without dreams, without the comforting illusions that most people cling to. Machiavelli believed that almost everyone sees life through stories they want to be true. Leaders imagine loyalty where there is only convenience. Lovers imagine devotion where there is only fear of loneliness. Nations imagine virtue where there is only ambition wrapped in banners and hymns. But those who hold real power, he said, must train themselves to see not wishes, but reality, raw, sharp, and unsoftened. Tonight, we walk into that idea with him. You find yourself in the dim interior of a Florentine council chamber at the turn of the 16th century. The walls are lined with maps, thick parchment sheets pinned to the stone by iron nails. Candles flicker in brass holders, their flames bending gently toward the draught that creeps under the heavy doors. Men stand in clusters, whispering in measured tones. Some are restless, others are coldly still. And Machiavelli, not yet middle-aged, stands near a window where the night wind slips through the cracks, carrying the distant smell of river water and damp earth. He listens more than he speaks. That was always his way. From this corner of the room, he watches the faces of ambassadors and advisors as they argue over alliances, threats, and promises. One insists that France is a loyal friend. Another swears that the Pope's armies will never move against Florence. A third speaks of honor and trust, as though these were stone foundations rather than thin layers of paint that peel away at the first touch of rain. Machiavelli's eyes narrow slightly. He has seen enough courts to know that these men are not describing reality. They are describing the world they wish existed. A safer world, a kinder world, one where promises bind tightly and intentions glow clear like lamps in the night. But outside these walls, soldiers march not out of loyalty, but hunger. Kings make alliances in the morning and break them by sunset, and the Pope, generous in words, can unleash steel without warning. That is the world as it is. He learned this lesson in France, watching King Louis XIV smile as he promised peace, only to send troops southward weeks later. He learned it in the courts of German princes who spoke in polite, polished Latin while quietly preparing to betray their neighbors. Everywhere he traveled, he realized the same truth. People pretend to act from virtue, but they move according to pressure, fear, opportunity, and desire. Behind every speech, a motive. Behind every motive, a need. This wasn't cynicism, it was clarity. Machiavelli believed that clarity is mercy, not cruelty. When you see the world for what it is, you stop expecting it to be something it cannot be. You stop building your hopes on the wind. And most importantly, you stop mistaking danger for safety. To understand this, imagine walking the streets of Florence with him. The sky is heavy with low clouds, and the lanterns hanging from balconies sway gently in the breeze. The Arno River flows dark and slow beneath its bridges. Tailors close their shutters, merchants sweep the dust from their thresholds, and somewhere down the alley, a crowd murmurs about the latest shift in politics, a rumor that France might march, or that the Medici might return, or that the Republic might fall yet again. Florence is a city that breathes uncertainty, and Machiavelli breathes it in deeply. Where others feel only fear, he observes. Where others panic, he watches. Where others imagine stability, he sees movement. For him, realism isn't an emotion. It is a discipline, a muscle strengthened through experience. He once wrote that the world is divided into two types of people, those who dream and those who wake. The dreamers stumble through life blinded by hopes and assumptions. They are surprised by betrayal, shocked by failure, and devastated when events do not unfold according to their expectations. But the awakened, the ones who see the world as it is, remain steady. They adjust quickly. They anticipate the unpredictable. They understand that human behavior follows patterns as old as hunger and fire. Step with him now into the memory of a battlefield in the Tuscan countryside. The morning fog clings to the hills like a pale shroud, and the ground is soft beneath your feet. Machiavelli stands beside a commander who swears that his mercenaries will fight loyally. But Machiavelli can see the truth in their eyes. They are restless, hungry, and disinterested. Their posture reveals no discipline, no loyalty, no sense of belonging. Their allegiance is to coins, not causes. The commander believes the world as he wishes it to be. Machiavelli sees it as it is. Hours later, those mercenaries flee at the first sign of danger, leaving the battlefield in chaos. Machiavelli does not celebrate this prediction. He is not pleased by being right. On the contrary, he finds it tragic. Tragic that leaders so often blind themselves with optimism. Tragic that good intentions become traps. Tragic that the gap between fantasy and reality causes more suffering than war itself. This is why his first law is simple, quiet, and mercilessly honest. See the world as it is, not as you wish it to be. Not because reality is beautiful, but because reality is navigable. Imagine standing now in Machiavelli's study years later, when exile has pushed him far from the city he served. The room is narrow, the ceiling low, the windows facing fields of winter grass. A small fire burns by the hearth, its crackling warmth barely enough to soften the cold that seeps through the walls. The table before him is covered with books, Livy, Tacitus, Plutarch, the voices of ancient worlds. Every night, after tending to the farm and speaking briefly with neighbors, he changes into fine clothes, not because anyone sees him, but because he wants to feel worthy of the conversations he is about to have with long-dead historians. He opens their books and listens. He asks questions. He underlines sentences. And slowly, he begins shaping his understanding into laws. His first law does not come from ambition. It comes from experience, from humiliation, from watching cities rise and fall, from seeing how easily people deceive themselves. But tonight, in this dim room, you can feel the calm weight of his insight. Power, to Machiavelli, is not dominance, it is perception. The person who sees the truth clearly, without the mist of wishful thinking, survives storms that destroy others. They lead more wisely, they adapt more quickly, they suffer fewer surprises. In the soft crackle of firewood and the slow, steady turning of parchment pages, something becomes clear. The first step toward power is not action, it is observation, pure, unguarded observation. Let the illusions of things fall away. Let the simple shape of reality come into focus. Let the world stand before you as it is, shifting, imperfect, sharp-edged, and unfiltered. That is where Machiavelli begins, and that is where we begin. Law 2. Fortify your reputation before you need it. Power rarely announces its arrival. It doesn't give warnings or knock politely or wait until you're ready. That is why Machiavelli believed the second law was more important than armies, gold, or clever words. A ruler must build his reputation long before he needs to use it. Reputation in his mind was not decoration. It was armor, not the kind hammered from iron plates, but the quiet kind, composed of perception, memory, and the stories people whisper when you are not in the room. Tonight, we walk with him through the narrow streets of Florence and the long corridors of European courts to understand how this armor is forged. Imagine the sun rising over Florence, its warm light sliding along terracotta rooftops and waking the city with a soft glow. Merchants open their stalls, apprentices sweep stone thresholds, and the chatter of the streets begins to thicken like the scent of baking bread. Machiavelli walks through this morning hum with a scroll tucked under his arm. A report for the Signoria, the governing council of the Republic. In his youth as a diplomat, he wrote constantly. Reports, letters, notes, observations, not because someone demanded it, but because he sensed something unspoken. In a city of shifting alliances and fragile loyalties, your name must travel faster than you do. He understood early that reputation begins in small acts, in diligence, in clarity, in consistency. The kind of qualities ordinary people overlook, but powerful ones never forget. On quiet mornings like this, he delivered his reports before anyone else had risen from their beds. He greeted guards by name, spoke with clerks respectfully, and left each room before his presence grew heavy. Not to impress, but to cultivate something subtle, the expectation that he was reliable. Reputation, he believed, is planted in routine and harvested in crisis. Step now into one of the council chambers. The air is thick with the rustle of parchment and the low murmur of voices weaving through the dim light. A debate rages. Florence must decide how to navigate the ambitions of the French king. Some advisors speak boldly of alliances, others fear attack. And then, among the noise, someone mentions Machiavelli's name, not his position, not his wealth. He had little, not his family. They were modest. They mention his reliability. They mention his sharp, steady letters. They mention how he sees details others miss, how his words cut away exaggeration, how his warnings are never careless. In a world where truth bends easily, one man's consistency becomes its own form of power. Years later, when Machiavelli traveled as an ambassador, he carried his reputation like a lantern. It lit dark rooms, it softened suspicious eyes. He walked into French courts, Spanish fortresses, and the Vatican itself with no army behind him, only a name shaped by careful craft. Picture a cold winter evening in the court of Louis XV. Drawn tapestries hang heavy along the walls. The floor is polished stone, reflecting the golden shimmer of torches. Courtiers stand in clusters, their silk garments brushing lightly as they shift their weight. They measure one another constantly, noting small gestures, subtle tone shifts, signs of weakness or advantage. Into this world steps Machiavelli, wearing a cloak not of luxury but of quiet confidence. People watch him, not because he is important, but because his letters have already entered these rooms before he has. They know his reputation for clarity. They know he sees patterns others gloss over. They know he is not easily deceived. Reputation travels faster than footsteps. This is the law's essence. A person who cultivates a strong, consistent character becomes someone others must reckon with, even if they hold no title, no wealth, no army. Machiavelli saw this repeatedly. Kings trusted men with good reputations more than those with good intentions. Generals listened to those whose past actions carried weight. Even enemies hesitated before crossing someone whose name was edged with discipline. You feel the truth of it when you walk with him through a foreign palace. The air smells faintly of wax and pine. Servants glide silently between chambers. Courtiers nod politely, too politely perhaps, as he passes. He offers no dramatic gestures, no flamboyant displays. His power lies in the fact that people already believe he sees more than he says. And in politics, belief is often more influential than fact. Reputation also has a darker side, one Machiavelli learned through pain. When the Medici returned to Florence, the Republic collapsed almost overnight. Doors slammed shut, old alliances dissolved like dust in rainfall. Suddenly, everyone who had served the old government stood under suspicion, and Machiavelli, loyal, hard-working Machiavelli, was pulled into the storm. He was imprisoned, tortured, accused of conspiracies he never touched. Why? Because his reputation as a committed Republican was real. Ironically, the very consistency that made him valuable now made him vulnerable. Those who knew his loyalty understood he could not be bought, and so his name, once a lantern, became a target. This is another truth wrapped within the law. Reputation grants power, but it also defines your enemies. But even here, in the cold shadows of a prison cell, Machiavelli understood something vital. It is better to be known clearly than to be misjudged shallowly. A vague reputation helps no one. A strong one, even when dangerous, carries dignity. It gives a person shape in the world. After his release in exile, when he lived quietly in the countryside, that reputation endured. Visitors sought him out. Letters arrived asking for counsel. People still feared his insight, respected his approach, and whispered his name with a mixture of caution and admiration. He was far from power, yet power still reached for him, because reputation outlasts position. Imagine now sitting with him at the wooden desk in his farmhouse study. The oil lamp burns low, casting gentle shadows across the floor. The wind taps lightly against the shutters. Machiavelli dips his quill, pauses, and then writes slowly, "A prince should strive to be thought of as merciful, faithful, humane, sincere, and religious." But he adds in quieter ink, almost as a warning, "Yet he should be able to act otherwise when necessary." Here lies the heart of the second law. Reputation is not a cage. It is a tool, one you must shape intentionally before the world demands it from you. If you wait until danger comes, it will be too late. If you build it beforehand, it will hold back storms. So Machiavelli teaches not vanity, but preparation, not boasting, but consistency, not theatrics, but steady craft. And tonight, as the lamp flickers and the room around you softens into shadow, you begin to understand his meaning. Your name is the echo you send ahead into the world. Long before you arrive, it speaks for you. Long after you leave, it remembers you. Strengthen it early, guard it quietly. Let it be the armor you carry into daylight and the shield that lies beside you at night. Because when power finally calls, and it always does, your reputation will answer first. Law 3. Fear over love. When the world grows dark, power moves differently in darkness. When order weakens, when alliances tremble, when hunger or ambition begins to press against the edges of a city, people no longer respond to gentle words or distant promises. They respond to what they feel in their bones, security or danger. And Machiavelli, watching Italy fracture piece by piece, came to a conclusion that shocked his age and still unsettles ours. It is safer to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. Tonight, we walk into the heart of that idea, not through cruelty or brutality, but through the quiet, frightening fragility of human loyalty. Imagine a late winter evening in Florence. The sky is a deep slate gray, and a thin mist clings to the streets like a veil. Lanterns sway against the wind, and the city sounds different than it does in summer. The laughter is rarer, the footfalls quicker, the conversations shorter. People worry when the nights grow long, because long nights make space for uncertainty, and uncertainty breeds fear. Machiavelli walks through this dimness with his cloak pulled close. His mind turns over the problem of loyalty, how easily it changes, how fragile it truly is. He has seen it crumble in courts, in campaigns, in the eyes of soldiers who promised bravery but fled at the sight of steel. And he knows that love, warm and hopeful as it is, dissolves quickly when danger appears. He remembers a night in Cesena, standing beside Cesare Borgia, the man whose ruthlessness and precision shaped Machiavelli more than any other. The air was heavy with smoke from torches, and the bodies of conspirators lay sprawled in the square after a swift execution. People whispered prayers, some trembled, but none rebelled. Not that night, not after seeing what Borgia was capable of. Machiavelli did not admire cruelty, but he admired clarity. Cesare Borgia did not rely on affection. He relied on control. Love is held by a bond of gratitude, Machiavelli wrote, but men are ungrateful, fickle, liars, and deceivers. Love breaks when tested. Fear endures. Fear, in Machiavelli's mind, is not terror. It is stability, the kind that prevents chaos from spilling into the streets. He believed that when people face danger, hunger, or uncertainty, their first instinct is to protect themselves. In such moments, affection evaporates, but fear, a calm, consistent awareness of consequences, keeps people aligned when their emotions waver. To understand this, walk with him into a council chamber filled with anxious officials. They argue about a neighboring army moving closer to Florentine borders. One says the soldiers will show mercy. Another says the commander is honorable. A third insists the enemy simply wishes to negotiate. Machiavelli watches them quietly. Their words are full of optimism but empty of preparation. They rely on hope, not realism. He has seen what happens when leaders assume love and goodwill will protect them. He has seen cities surrender, believing mercy will follow. He has seen alliances collapse because one party trusted too easily. He has seen soldiers refuse to fight because they feel loyal only when safe. Love is light, but power is tested in shadows. Imagine the countryside after a battle, the cold air thick with dust, the scent of trampled earth rising from the ground. Machiavelli stands beside a commander who once ruled through charm and generosity. His men adored him, or so he thought. But the moment the enemy appeared, many abandoned him. Their affection was real, but it was no match for fear. Machiavelli watched this quietly. He didn't gloat. He didn't condemn. He simply understood. People act out of emotion until emotion fails them. Then they act out of survival. That is why he advised leaders to be feared, not cruel, but respected, predictable, disciplined, and decisive. Fear, when rooted in fairness and consistency, creates reliability. People obey not because they are terrified, but because they know disorder carries consequences. Cruelty is chaotic. Fear, properly wielded, is order. Step now into Machiavelli's study during his exile. The wind rattles the shutters gently, and the lamp beside him glows with a soft, golden light. He dips his quill and writes slowly, with deliberate strokes. Men love at their own will, but fear at the will of the prince. It is not a celebration of dominance. It is an acknowledgement of human nature. Love depends on emotion. Fear depends on structure. Love weakens when times grow hard. Fear strengthens when times grow dark. And Machiavelli, sitting alone in that quiet farmhouse, surrounded by the ghosts of cities that rose and fell, understood that leaders cannot rely on what changes with the weather. They must rely on what endures. When he speaks of fear, he does not speak of brutality. He speaks of boundaries, of consequences, of the firm lines that keep societies from tearing themselves apart. He believed a leader should be calmly feared, not violently hated. The distinction is everything. Hate is chaotic and unpredictable. Fear, when blended with justice, becomes discipline. Imagine a ruler who is too soft. His kindness is taken for weakness. His generosity is mistaken for desperation. His mercy is viewed as hesitation. Such a ruler invites danger without meaning to. Now imagine a ruler who is steady, clear, and unafraid to act decisively. He need not shout or strike. His authority is quiet, like a wolf's presence at the edge of a forest, unseen but unmistakably felt. That is the ruler Machiavelli trusted. Tonight, you can feel the shape of his third law settling in the quiet around you. It doesn't demand cruelty, it demands understanding. It demands the courage to recognize that people change when threatened, that loyalty is fragile, and that love, however beautiful, cannot hold a city together when the world grows dark. Fear, when shaped with discipline and fairness, becomes the thread that keeps chaos from unraveling everything. So Machiavelli whispers through time, let them love you if they wish, but let them fear breaking your order. For when storms rise, and they always do, it is fear, the calm, steady kind, that keeps the walls standing. Law 4. Prepare ruthlessly. Fortune favors the ready power, Machiavelli believed, belongs not to the strongest or the bravest, but to the one who prepares long before danger arrives. In a world where alliances shifted overnight, and armies could appear on the horizon with the speed of a summer storm, preparation was the only shield that did not crack. Tonight, we step into the quiet discipline behind that belief, into the fourth law, prepare ruthlessly, because fortune rewards the ready. Imagine a pale morning settling over the Tuscan hills. The light is soft, like the faint glow of a candle pressed behind a sheet of parchment. Machiavelli stands on a small rise overlooking the fields. Dew clings to the grass, the soil still cool beneath his boots. There is no sign of war here, no smoke, no drums, no movement of troops. Yet he studies the horizon as if something unseen approaches. For him, danger is never absent, it is simply waiting its turn. He had spent years watching Florence trust too easily in luck. Many believed treaties would hold because they wanted peace. They believed mercenaries would fight bravely because they had paid for bravery. They believed enemies would show mercy because mercy was reasonable. Machiavelli saw how these illusions led to disaster. He saw cities fall not because their enemies were strong, but because their leaders were unprepared. To him, fortune was like a river, calm one season, violent the next. You didn't pray, it stayed gentle. You built walls, strengthened banks, and cleared debris before the floods came. Those who failed to prepare blamed fate. Those who prepared quietly survived. Walk with him now along a narrow dirt road. Olive trees flank the path, their silver-green leaves trembling lightly in the wind. The countryside here looks peaceful, timeless even, but Machiavelli knew how deceptive that calm could be. Italy, in his lifetime, was a patchwork of rival states. Florence, Venice, Milan, Rome, and small duchies in between. Any one of them could be invaded with little warning. Paralyzed leaders hoped disaster would pass them by. Prepared leaders understood that hope was not a plan. Machiavelli spent his diplomatic years observing rulers who thrived under pressure. In France, he met kings who planned for war even during peace. In the courts of German princes, he saw leaders store resources for winters that had not yet come. In contrast, he watched Italian cities rely on fortune, believing their wealth or beauty would shield them. It never did. Preparation, he realized, was less a strategy and more a way of life, a constant, quiet awareness of the world's unpredictability. It meant training soldiers even when no enemy marched. It meant reinforcing walls that looked perfectly fine. It meant studying alliances not for their promises, but for their likely failures. This kind of readiness felt unnecessary to most, even excessive, but to Machiavelli it was the foundation of stability. Step with him into an army encampment outside Florence. Tents line the field in neat rows. Smoke curls slowly from cook fires. Soldiers drill in repetitive motions, thrust, step, turn, raise shield. The rhythm is almost meditative. Machiavelli watches with a calm seriousness. He pays attention to details others ignore, the condition of boots, the precision of movements, the discipline in posture. To him, small failures now become catastrophic flaws later. He learned this lesson painfully through Florence's reliance on mercenaries. Mercenary companies looked fierce, but their loyalty was thin as dust. They fought when paid, hesitated when risks grew, and fled when battles turned. Machiavelli watched them buckle under pressure more than once. Their failure wasn't fate. It was lack of preparation, lack of true discipline, true loyalty, true foundation. Borrowed strength collapses first. Years later, during his exile, the idea of preparation deepened. Each evening, after working in the fields, he retreated into his study. By lamplight, he read ancient histories, Roman generals, Greek statesmen, leaders who built power not on luck, but on readiness. His fingers traced the margins of the pages, marking stories of rulers who fortified cities during peace, drilled armies before threats, and planned responses to crises long before crises emerged. This became the quiet backbone of his fourth law. One must prepare most intensely when times appear calmest, because calm is deceptive, because threats grow in silence, because danger respects no schedule. Imagine him at his desk, ink slowly drying on parchment. Outside, the wind folds through the fields in soft waves. In this quiet isolation, he writes that fortune harms those who make no effort to resist her. Not because fortune is powerful, but because humans are careless. Preparation becomes a form of resistance, a quiet defiance against chaos. He believed that a prepared leader does not drown when the river rises. Instead, he adjusts, redirects, strengthens. Preparation turns unpredictable disasters into manageable obstacles. It transforms bad luck into mere inconvenience. It is the difference between panic and calm, collapse and endurance. Tonight, as the lamp glows softly and the world narrows into a single circle of warm light, you understand why Machiavelli placed such importance on readiness, not as paranoia, not as obsession, but as discipline, as awareness, as respect for the world's instability. To prepare ruthlessly is not to fear the future. It is to meet it with steady hands, because fortune may be wild, but she bends for those who have already built their foundations. Law 5, trust, no mercenaries, build strength from within. Machiavelli lived in a time when cities did not defend themselves with their own people. They hired others companies of wandering swordsmen who fought for coin, not loyalty, and when danger grew sharp, these men often vanished into the night. This failure shaped one of Machiavelli's most uncompromising laws of power. Never rely on mercenaries. Build strength from within. Picture a quiet morning outside Florence. Mist settles low over the fields, softening the edges of vineyards and farmhouses. In the distance, the silhouettes of soldiers move slowly across the plain. At first they seem disciplined, almost graceful in the pale light. But as Machiavelli approaches, their flaws become clear. Some drill without focus, some speak instead of work, and others polish their weapons with an indifference that borders on arrogance. He sees it immediately. These men are not rooted. They have no stake in Florence, and a soldier without belonging cannot be trusted when danger arrives. To Machiavelli, mercenaries were not merely unreliable, they were dangerous. They fought for the highest bidder, shifted sides with the wind, and demanded higher pay whenever they sensed weakness. They brought risk disguised as strength. He had watched them abandon battlefields, shirk discipline, and even turn against the cities that hired them. Their loyalty lived only as long as the coins in their pockets. Walk with him now through a mercenary camp. The tents are mismatched, the fires burn unevenly, and the atmosphere holds a restless, rootless energy. These men speak dozens of dialects. They laugh easily, but with hardened eyes. Some sharpen their blades with care, others ignore theirs entirely. They look strong, but Machiavelli sees beneath the surface a fighting force without unity, without pride, without a shared fate. One of the commanders boasts to Machiavelli about his company's victories. But Machiavelli watches the men behind him, the slouched shoulders, the careless stances, the glances that shift toward escape routes rather than toward enemy lines. Power built on their strength is an illusion. He had seen Florence rely on such men before, and he had watched the consequences unfold. In one campaign, mercenaries fled at the first sight of a determined enemy. In another, they demanded double pay and refused to fight until the city agreed. Sometimes they even turned on their employers. Each failure was blamed on fate, but Machiavelli saw the truth clearly. Leaders had trusted borrowed strength. He believed that the foundation of power must rise from within, from people who share a homeland, a common purpose, a place in the world they want to protect, soldiers drawn from the land, trained through discipline, and bound to their city through pride and duty. These were the only forces that could endure the storm. Imagine a different camp, one Machiavelli had helped form, Florence's citizen militia. The rows are straight, the movement synchronized, the discipline visible even from a distance. Their uniforms are simple but consistent. Their drills are repetitive but steady. These men do not fight for coin. They fight for home, for family, for the very soil beneath their boots. Machiavelli believed deeply in this model. A republic defended by its own people would stand longer than one defended by strangers. Strength drawn from the land carries roots, and roots hold when the winds turn violent. This belief was not sentimental. It was practical. A citizen will defend his farm. A mercenary will defend only his income. A citizen fights to protect the world where his children sleep. A mercenary fights until someone pays him more, or the battle becomes too dangerous. Picture Machiavelli writing in his study during his exile. The room is dim, lit only by the flickering glow of a small oil lamp. Outside, the wind brushes softly against the shutters. He dips his quill into ink and writes with the calm certainty of someone who has seen too much to be deceived. Mercenaries are useless and dangerous. A prince must lay foundations on his own arms, not on the arms of others. His words are simple, but beneath them lies a lifetime of frustration. He had begged Florence to build its own defense. He had watched the Republic suffer for ignoring him. He had witnessed cities fall because their protection was rented, not earned. To him, depending on mercenaries was like building a house on drifting sand. It looked stable in calm weather, but the moment storms rolled in, the foundation shifted, and the house fell. Now imagine the broader meaning. Machiavelli did not speak only of soldiers. He spoke of all forms of power, borrowed influence, borrowed authority, borrowed alliances, borrowed strength in any form. All of it is fragile. All of it disappears when most needed. True power must rise from within, from skills, from discipline, from loyalty, from structures that cannot be bought or easily broken. A leader who understands this becomes unshakable. A leader who ignores it becomes vulnerable at the moment of greatest need. Tonight, as the lamp burns low and the night deepens softly around Machiavelli's words, the law becomes clear. Do not build your strength on the promises of others. Build it on the steady ground beneath your own feet, because borrowed power collapses first and falls the hardest. Law 6. Study human nature, for it rarely changes. Machiavelli's quietest and most enduring belief was that human nature does not change. Kings and merchants, soldiers and farmers, nobles and commoners, all of them carried different burdens, wore different clothes, spoke in different tones, and occupied different rooms, yet behind these masks lay the same desires, the same fears, the same jealousies, and the same private impulses. To understand power, he believed, a leader must first understand these unchanging patterns, because no strategy, no army, no political structure could endure unless it rested on a realistic understanding of the human heart. This is why the 6th law appears gentle on the surface, but is in truth deeply demanding. Study human nature, for it rarely changes. To explore this law without overwhelming movement or visual complexity, imagine a single, quiet space, Machiavelli's dimly lit study during his exile. The room is small, its walls lined with shelves of heavy wooden boards that bend slightly under the weight of old texts. A single oil lamp stands on the desk, casting a warm, amber glow across the room, illuminating the grain of the wood, the ink stains on the table, and the scattered pages filled with his notes. The rest of the house is silent. Outside, the wind brushes lightly against the shutters, and the fields beyond the window dissolve into darkness. In this stillness, Machiavelli reads, not to escape his circumstances, but to understand the steady pulse that governs human behavior. On the table lie the works of Livy, Tacitus, Sallust, historians who chronicled the rise and fall of ancient states. As he turns the pages, he does not look for dramatic events. Instead, he looks for the small, repeating patterns behind those events. He looks for the emotions that made leaders reckless, the fears that made citizens abandon principles, the hopes that pushed people toward bold decisions, and the insecurities that shaped entire governments. To Machiavelli, human nature was not a philosophical question. It was the key to predicting behavior. Events changed from century to century, but people, as he saw it, did not. Their reactions to fear, temptation, ambition, humiliation, hope, and loss remained almost identical across time. Sitting alone, he allows memories from his diplomatic career to resurface, not as shifting scenes, but as thoughts drifting through the same dim room. He recalls kings in French courts who smiled generously while masking deep anxiety about rivals. He remembers small Italian princes who projected strength yet trembled beneath the pressure of even minor threats. He thinks of ordinary Florentines in crowded markets whose moods shifted wildly with rumors, their hopes bright in the morning and their fears swelling by nightfall. All of these people, from the highest ruler to the humblest citizen, were unpredictable in circumstance but profoundly predictable in nature. Machiavelli recognized that beneath the complexity of politics, there were two forces that moved people more than any others: fear and desire. Fear pulled people backward, toward safety, toward obedience, toward caution. Desire pushed them forward, toward opportunity, toward promise, toward risk. A leader who failed to understand these two forces, he believed, would misjudge every decision, every alliance, every moment of danger. He wrote that men desire things freely, but they fear by necessity, which is why desire often fades when circumstances shift, but fear remains steady. Leaders who misread this relationship found themselves betrayed, surprised, or abandoned when the world began to change. He did not study human nature to become cynical, but to avoid illusions. In his view, illusions were the true danger. A ruler who believed people were naturally loyal, grateful, or morally driven would be devastated when reality contradicted that belief. But a ruler who understood the deeper constants of behavior, selfishness, insecurity, competitiveness, the longing for security, could govern with clarity. From this quiet study, Machiavelli wrote that people exaggerate their own importance, overestimate the virtue of allies, underestimate the resentment of rivals, and often fail to recognize how quickly crowds can shift from praise to anger. He believed that people admire strength but envy intimacy, that they seek guidance in uncertainty yet resist control when they feel safe, and that they easily forget favors while remembering insults for years. Understanding these patterns, he argued, allowed a leader to anticipate betrayal before it happened, to recognize loyalty that was genuine rather than convenient, and to make decisions based on human reality rather than human wishfulness. Now imagine him lifting his pen and writing slowly, the lamp flickering softly beside him, his face calm yet focused. Outside, the night deepens, but inside this small circle of light, he shapes a law not about power itself, but about the foundation that holds all power upright. No leader can govern effectively without understanding the people they govern. To him, human nature was the only stable ground in a world that constantly shifted. Armies could change, allies could fail, fortunes could collapse, but people, their impulses, their motives, their hidden vulnerabilities remained fundamentally the same. This was not a dark truth to Machiavelli. It was a clarifying one. It meant that a ruler who learned these patterns could create stability, anticipate danger, and guide a state with a steady hand even through the most turbulent times. And so the sixth law reveals itself in the quiet glow of that lamp, surrounded by old books and steady thought. Study human nature, because nothing else stays still. Law 7. Act decisively. Power dies in hesitation. Machiavelli believed that hesitation was more dangerous than any enemy. Armies could be rebuilt, alliances repaired, reputations mended, but a single moment of indecision at the wrong time could unravel everything a leader had spent years building. In his world, where the political landscape shifted like sand under an unsteady tide, decisive action was not simply a virtue, it was a necessity. A leader who paused too long invited chaos into the doorway, and once chaos entered, it rarely left quietly. To understand this law, imagine again the same small, dimly lit study he occupied during exile, the same wooden desk, the same oil lamp casting a calm, warm glow, the same quiet room that served as a stage for his thoughts. Machiavelli did not need a battlefield in front of him to recall the patterns he had witnessed. The memories played behind his eyes while he sat in the stillness, each memory reinforcing a truth that governed the rise and fall of states. When a moment demands action, delay is a silent defeat. He had seen this truth repeatedly during his diplomatic years. His mind returns to those moments now, not as a shifting montage of scenes, but as a single chain of thoughts, all drifting through the silence of his study. He remembers standing in council chambers where leaders talked endlessly, circling issues with careful language, hoping that time alone would bring clarity. Yet time brought only confusion, as rivals strengthened their positions and opportunities slipped away unnoticed. Leaders who feared making the wrong decision often made something far worse, no decision at all. and the cost of that paralysis was always paid in crisis. In France, he had observed a king who acted swiftly and never allowed uncertainty to settle around him. That king understood that hesitation spreads like smoke through a room. It unsettles allies, emboldens enemies, and dissolves the confidence of followers. Machiavelli admired him not for his victories, but for his ability to act precisely at the moment when others hesitated. The king did not wait for perfect circumstances because he knew such circumstances rarely existed. Instead, he created conditions by moving first. Meanwhile, in the smaller courts of Italy, Machiavelli watched princes who were intelligent and well-meaning, but paralyzed by fear of making the wrong choice. They waited for clearer signs, waited for more information, waited for allies to commit, waited for threats to fully reveal themselves. And while they waited, they lost everything. Their delay became an open declaration of vulnerability. Soldiers lost faith, advisors scattered, rivals recognized the softness and struck quickly. Machiavelli wrote about them later with a sense of sadness, not anger, because he believed these leaders failed not from lack of ability, but from lack of courage to accept uncertainty. To him, decisive action was not recklessness. It was clarity. It was the recognition that in political life every choice carries risk, including the choice to do nothing. A leader who waits for the perfect moment enters a fight already defeated, because the world belongs to those who move while others hesitate. Now imagine Machiavelli folding his hands on the table and leaning back slightly, the lamp behind him casting long shadows across the room. In this quiet, he reflects on the nature of hesitation itself. He believed that hesitation often disguised itself as caution, as prudence, even as wisdom. But beneath these polite names lay something simpler: fear, not fear of enemies, but fear of responsibility. Leaders feared being blamed, feared making mistakes, feared losing favor. Yet by trying to avoid those outcomes, they created the very disasters they wished to escape. He wrote that people prefer leaders who make clear, firm decisions, even imperfect ones, because decisiveness brings a sense of stability. Stability generates trust. Trust inspires loyalty. Loyalty forms the backbone of power. A hesitant leader, by contrast, produces doubt, and doubt is contagious. People withdraw support quietly when they sense a ruler wavers. Advisors speak more cautiously. Generals hesitate before following orders. Citizens begin to wonder whether their leader can protect them. Thus, a leader's private uncertainty slowly becomes a public collapse. In this still room, Machiavelli examines the balance between boldness and caution. He did not advocate impulsiveness. A leader should study the landscape, read the signs, understand the stakes. But once understanding is reached, action must follow immediately. He believed that decisive action allows a leader to shape events rather than be shaped by them. Those who act seize initiative. Those who wait surrender it. He turns the pages of ancient history, searching for examples of this law in the lives of earlier rulers. Roman generals who hesitated lost entire legions. Governors who delayed reforms witnessed revolts they could have prevented. Commanders who waited for perfect conditions marched into battles already lost. Meanwhile, those who acted swiftly often overcame disadvantages through timing alone. The pattern repeated so consistently across centuries that Machiavelli considered decisiveness not a trait, but a law of survival. From this reflection arises a deeper realization: decisive action signals strength. Strength attracts respect, and respect discourages rebellion. Even enemies respect a leader who acts quickly and firmly because such a leader is difficult to predict, harder to corner, and impossible to undermine through hesitation. He writes slowly, letting the ink dry in steady lines. Fortune is a woman, and she favors the bold. This metaphor was not meant to romanticize risk, but to highlight a truth he believed deeply: that opportunity approaches those who reach for it, not those who wait for reassurance. Imagine him now placing his quill down and closing his eyes for a moment. The room feels still, as if every thought has settled into its proper place. He knows that leaders must accept risk, for the world itself offers no guarantees. Action then becomes a kind of courage, the courage to move forward despite uncertainty, despite fear, despite the possibility of failure. And in that movement, power takes shape. Tonight, the seventh law rests quietly in the lamplight. Act decisively, for hesitation kills power long before enemies do. Clarity, timing, and resolve are not luxuries. They are the spine of leadership. A leader who hesitates loses direction, loses trust, and eventually loses the world they hope to govern. Better to move and adjust than wait and drown. Better to act imperfectly than not at all. Better to seize the moment than surrender it to fear. Law 8. Guard your allies, crush your enemies. Machiavelli believed that power could survive storms of poverty, storms of war, storms of uncertainty, and even storms of unpopularity. But the one thing it could not survive was confusion. Nothing created confusion faster than a leader who treated allies and enemies with equal softness, equal vagueness, or equal hesitation. In his view, a ruler had to draw two lines with absolute clarity: who stands beside you and who stands against you. The eighth law rose from this belief. A leader must guard allies with intention and crush enemies completely, for half measures breed instability. To understand this law without jumping between constant scenes, return once more to the quiet space where Machiavelli's thoughts sharpened, his study during exile. The lamp casts its steady glow over manuscripts and maps, over the worn surface of his desk, over the same ink-stained fingers that once carried political messages across Europe. He sits there, not as a soldier or general, but as a man who has watched leaders fall simply because they misjudged the relationships around them. He believed that alliances were delicate structures, not built from affection or sentiment, but from shared interests. An ally remained loyal only so long as the balance of advantage held, only so long as both parties saw benefit in cooperation. If that balance shifted, if a ruler neglected the relationship, if doubts were allowed to grow, allies drifted away. A leader who lost allies did not lose them at the moment of betrayal. He lost them quietly, gradually, long before the break became visible. Machiavelli reflects on this truth not through dramatic memories, but through patterns he saw reappear again and again. He recalls how some leaders surrounded themselves with allies they never bothered to understand, assuming that loyalty was permanent rather than maintained through careful attention. He remembers council chambers where rulers heard warnings about weakening alliances, yet dismissed them because they found the warnings inconvenient. He remembers how cities believed their friends would remain forever friendly, without realizing that alliances required constant reinforcement, communication, respect, and shared purpose. From this stillness comes the first half of the law. A leader must guard allies not with flattery, but with reliability. Allies must know that commitments will be honored, that partnerships will be defended, and that betrayal will never come from the leader's side. When allies feel neglected or uncertain, they drift into the shadows where rivals wait patiently. But when they feel protected, when they trust the steadiness of a leader's decisions, they remain close even in difficult times. This does not mean dependency, it means clarity. Clarity that allies are valued, clarity that promises will be kept, clarity that cooperation has purpose. In Machiavelli's view, the leader who guards allies builds a wall of support wide enough to withstand political storms. Yet he also knew that loyalty from allies did not remove the danger posed by enemies. Enemies, he believed, were not merely opponents. They were threats to stability, seeds of disorder, and potential catalysts for rebellion or collapse. Leaving an enemy half defeated, half contained, or half silenced was not mercy. It was negligence. Half measures allowed enemies to regain strength, gather followers, and wait for a moment of weakness to strike. So the second half of the law emerges. Crush your enemies, not out of cruelty, but out of the recognition that unfinished conflict always returns. Machiavelli saw countless leaders attempt compromise with rivals who had no intention of honoring agreements. He saw rulers attempt to appease those who wished to overthrow them. He saw states negotiate peace while their enemies gathered forces just beyond the border. The result was always the same. When leaders tried to soften conflict, they merely postponed disaster. In the quiet of his study, surrounded by maps of Italy's fractured territories, Machiavelli writes with calm certainty, "Injuries must be done all at once, benefits little by little." What he meant was simple. If a leader must act against an enemy, the action must be decisive, complete, and final, so that the wound does not fester and return with greater force. This was not a philosophy of cruelty. It was a philosophy of finality. Conflict, once engaged, must be resolved. Enemies, once identified, must be neutralized. A leader who hesitates, divides attention, or hopes hostility will fade, invites the enemy to grow bold. Yet even as he writes about crushing enemies, the lamp's glow softens his expression, because he recognizes a deeper truth. Most leaders fall not because they fear their enemies, but because they refuse to acknowledge them. They pretend hostility is harmless. They disregard warnings. They assume that silence means surrender. But Machiavelli understood that silence is often preparation, and that enemies wait for the moment when a leader grows complacent. Thus, the eighth law demands two forms of vigilance: protect allies intentionally and disarm enemies decisively. If either task is neglected, instability follows. In Machiavelli's earlier years, when he served the Florentine Republic, he saw how the refusal to act firmly allowed rival factions to take root. Small groups of discontented nobles, left unchecked, became powerful voices of opposition. Mild disagreements grew into political fractures. The Republic weakened not because its enemies were strong, but because its leaders refused to resolve conflicts before they expanded. Now, in exile, he sees the pattern clearly. A minor threat ignored becomes a major threat. A rivalry tolerated becomes a rebellion. A half-defeated enemy becomes a future conqueror. For Machiavelli, power demanded not harshness, but decisiveness. To guard allies meant to nurture trust. To crush enemies meant to remove danger before it spread. And in the warm stillness of his study, surrounded by the steady hum of silence, he concludes the eighth law with quiet clarity. Be clear about your friends, and clearer about your enemies. Ambiguity is weakness. Half measures are ruin. A leader must build stability by strengthening the bonds that support him and eliminating the threats that seek his downfall. Law 9. Win through actions, not words. Machiavelli believed that power, in its most durable form, did not rise from speeches, promises, polite declarations, or beautifully phrased intentions. These things could charm crowds, soothe anxieties, and create brief waves of enthusiasm, but they faded quickly because words alone carried no weight when tested by danger. What endured, what shaped loyalty, inspired confidence, and commanded respect were actions, steady and tangible, even when small. Thus, the ninth law formed with quiet certainty: win through actions, not words. To explore this law without scattering scenes, imagine once again his study in exile. The wooden desk worn smooth by years of use, the oil lamp burning with its soft golden glow, and the stillness of the room surrounding him like a kind of protective shell. Here, in this quiet place, he reflects on the difference between leaders who talk and leaders who act, and how those two types of people leave very different marks on the world. Machiavelli had watched countless rulers speak impressively while doing very little. He remembered advisors who delivered grand declarations about loyalty, virtue, or future plans, yet failed to make a single decision that actually strengthened the state. He had seen city councils debate endlessly, holding beautiful philosophical discussions while avoiding genuine responsibility. He had witnessed commanders who shouted eloquently before their troops, but hesitated the moment real choices had to be made, and in each case, he saw the same truth. Words raised expectations, actions determined outcomes. He believed that a leader who relied on words alone created a fragile kind of authority, one that required constant maintenance, constant reassurance, constant justification. A leader who relied on actions, by contrast, created something quieter, but far more permanent: credibility. A decisive action, even a small one, traveled farther than 1,000 promises. A fulfilled commitment carried more meaning than the longest speech. And a single, well-timed decision replaced the need for countless explanations. Sitting in the warm glow of the lamp, Machiavelli opens one of his notes and studies a small paragraph he once wrote about human perception. He realized that people judge leaders largely through what they can see, not what they are told. Someone may claim courage, but if fear guides their choices, people notice. Someone may promise justice, but if favoritism leaks through their decisions, people remember. Someone may speak of duty, yet abandon their responsibilities, and people understand the truth long before words can hide it. Thus, to him, actions were not simply deeds. They were expressions of character. They revealed the core of a leader more honestly than any statement ever could. He reflected often on how easily words can be reshaped. Words can be exaggerated, softened, disguised, or polished until they lose all connection to reality. Actions resist that treatment. An army marches or it doesn't. A city prepares for danger or it doesn't. A leader keeps a promise or breaks it. The clarity of action was a form of truth, and Machiavelli believed truth mattered far more in governance than idealism. To understand how deeply he valued this clarity, imagine him recalling a moment during his diplomatic missions. He had once observed a ruler who welcomed ambassadors with elegant speeches, full of friendship and goodwill. But when the time came to defend his allies or honor a treaty, he faltered, offering excuses instead of commitment. Machiavelli noted that the allies did not remember the speeches, they remembered the failure to act, and from that failure, trust evaporated with astonishing speed. By contrast, he also remembered leaders who spoke little but acted decisively. A commander who quietly reinforced defenses before winter, a magistrate who addressed a grievance before it became a dispute, a prince who fulfilled obligations without announcing them loudly. These leaders, in Machiavelli's mind, carried real power, not because they impressed people with words, but because they built confidence through results. Returning to his study, he realizes that actions create a kind of momentum. When a leader acts, people believe more is possible. They feel the weight of commitment, the steadiness of direction, the comfort of knowing the ruler does not hide behind language. And in times of uncertainty, people follow those who move, not those who merely speak of movement. He writes slowly, almost experimentally, as though shaping the thought with care. Men judge more by the eye than by the hand, for everyone can see, but few can understand. Meaning, people understand deeds even if they fail to understand reasoning. A leader who acts commands the respect of those who cannot analyze the world deeply, but can recognize confidence when they see it. Actions, he believed, also gave structure to leadership. They established rhythm. They created patterns others could follow. They signaled which values were real and which were decorative. And most importantly, they eliminated doubt. He had learned, through failure as much as through observation, that doubt was poison to political stability. When a leader relied too heavily on words, doubt spread quickly. People wondered whether the promises were sincere, whether the plans were real, whether the leader held the strength needed to confront danger. But when a leader acted, even imperfectly, doubt faded. People trusted movement more than declarations. In this dim room, the thought settles into shape. Words attempt to sculpt an image of power. Actions demonstrate its substance. Thus, Machiavelli saw action as both shield and sword. It protected a leader from accusations of weakness and carved a path through uncertainty. Even small actions, a reform issued on time, a punishment carried out consistently, a strategic decision made without hesitation, accumulated into a foundation that others could trust. The ninth law, therefore, is less about aggression or militancy and more about authenticity. It asks a leader to replace performance with substance, rhetoric with resolve, intentions with reality. To rule through actions is to rule through truth, because actions cannot lie. As the lamp flickers gently beside him, Machiavelli rests his hands on the table, understanding fully that words may win applause, but actions win loyalty. Words may comfort temporarily, but actions secure cities and shape nations. Words dissolve at the first sign of crisis, but actions remain visible long after storms have passed. So he writes the law not as a warning, but as guidance. Win through actions, not words. For in the end, power does not belong to those who speak the loudest, but to those who do the most, and who continue doing even when the world grows uncertain. Law 10. Build a reputation that outlives you. 7,000 characters, long sentence rhythm, minimal scene changes, cap cut safe. Machiavelli understood that power was not only something a leader held in the present moment, it was something carried on the breath of others, spoken in their gatherings, remembered in their complaints, measured in their expectations, and stored in the quiet corners of their imagination. A leader, as power, lived both in what he did and in what people believed he was capable of doing. Reputation, therefore, became a force as real as armies and as influential as gold. And so, the 10th and final law emerged with a kind of quiet inevitability. Build a reputation that outlives you. To understand this law without shifting constantly between places, remain in Machiavelli's small study. The same wooden desk, the same warm lamplight, the same shelves filled with histories he had trusted for wisdom. In this calm interior, his mind does not wander across the battlefields and councils he once knew. Instead, it turns inward, toward the concept of reputation, how it forms, how it grows, how it follows a leader like a shadow that refuses to leave. Reputation, to him, was not vanity. It was architecture. It was a structure built slowly, stone by stone, through actions, choices, and consistency. A leader's reputation determined whether allies cooperated willingly or reluctantly, whether enemies hesitated or advanced, whether citizens feared instability or trusted the future. Reputation shaped the world even when the leader stayed silent. As he sits in the lamplight, Machiavelli recalls how easily a strong reputation could stabilize a kingdom. A ruler known for fairness rarely faced rebellion. A commander known for discipline rarely saw his men falter. A prince known for firmness was rarely challenged. People, he believed, did not always judge leaders by deep analysis. They judged them by stories repeated across tables, by impressions that persisted, by the small but steady memories left by decisive moments. He understood reputation as a kind of silent messenger. It traveled ahead of a leader. It set expectations before he entered a room. It shaped negotiations before words were spoken, and it lingered long after he had left the stage. Therefore, Machiavelli argued that leaders must cultivate a reputation intentionally, not through empty theatrics, but through visible consistency. He believed that reputation was strengthened by predictability, being firm when firmness was needed, being generous deliberately rather than impulsively, being bold at the right moments, being cautious without appearing fearful. Every repeated behavior became a brick in the structure of reputation. He also believed reputation must be protected with vigilance. A single moment of weakness, if seen by many, could undo years of careful cultivation. A single betrayal could stain a ruler's image permanently. A single public hesitation could change the stories people repeated. This did not mean leaders should hide mistakes. It meant they should choose carefully which battles became public, which doubts became visible, and which vulnerabilities required silence rather than confession. Still seated in his solitary room, Machiavelli turns to the histories on his desk. He studies the rise and fall of ancient states not only for their strategic lessons, but for the way leaders' reputations shaped the destinies of their people. Roman generals who cultivated reputations for discipline commanded armies that remained loyal even in famine. Greek statesmen who built reputations for wisdom guided their cities through turbulent eras, but rulers who allowed their image to fracture through inconsistency, panic, or vanity saw their influence weaken long before their armies did. He recognized that reputation could survive even when circumstances turned dark. A leader with a strong reputation could endure temporary failure. People forgave those they believed in. They followed those whose character they trusted. But a leader with a weak or confused reputation could lose everything through a single misstep. Reputation then became a form of capital, perhaps the most valuable a leader could possess. Unlike wealth, it could not be stolen easily. Unlike armies, it did not require constant funding. Unlike alliances, it did not depend on others. It grew through discipline and remained steady when the world changed. From his desk, Machiavelli writes a quiet line, one that carries more weight than its simplicity suggests. A prince must seek to be esteemed. He meant that esteem, the respect granted by others, was not merely a luxury. It was a foundation of stability. A well-esteemed leader inspired loyalty, discouraged rebellion, and commanded the confidence of both friends and rivals. But the most striking part of this law was Machiavelli's belief that reputation should outlive the leader. A ruler dies, the idea of the ruler remains. Trust dies, the memory of trust remains. Power fades, the echo of power remains. A leader who shaped his reputation with clarity ensured that this echo would continue guiding the state even after his death. Imagine him leaning back slightly, eyes half closed, absorbing the quiet atmosphere of his study. The flickering lamp reflects in his eyes as he considers how leaders often think only of the present, of immediate threats, temporary victories, fleeting popularity, and how few think of their legacy. Yet legacy, he believed, determined the long-term stability of any political structure. Without a lasting reputation, everything built in life eventually collapses. He understood that building such a legacy required a balance of strength and restraint. A leader must show resolve without cruelty, generosity without weakness, ambition without recklessness. People remember extremes, noble or ignoble, but they trust consistent moderation even more. They trust leaders whose reputations are built on clear principles, not shifting moods. And so, in the quiet of this room, Machiavelli sees the 10th law settle into perfect clarity. Build a reputation that outlives you. Because reputations linger, they soften fears, steady alliances, and carve a place in memory that endures beyond mortality. The leader who shapes his reputation with intention creates stability even in absence, influence even in silence, and power even in death. As the lamp in Machiavelli's study burns low and the night folds softly around the edges of the page, the world grows quiet again. The same quiet that shaped his thinking, the same quiet that allowed him to see people as they were, without illusion or disguise. The air in the room is still, almost warm, carrying the faint scent of ink and old parchment. Somewhere far beyond the window, the fields stretch into darkness, and the sounds of the countryside fade into a distant, steady hush. Power, to Machiavelli, was never about noise. It was never about the loud clash of armies or the echo of grand speeches. It lived in the spaces between actions, in the calm certainty of decisions made with clarity, in the understanding of human nature that remains constant through centuries. It lived in the discipline of preparation, in the steadiness of resolve, in the reputation a leader shapes through a lifetime of choices. And now, as the pages close and the night settles deeper, the world of his thoughts drifts gently out of view. What remains is not fear or ambition, not victory or defeat, but a quiet awareness of how power moves, slowly, subtly, shaping the lives of those who hold it and those who follow it. If you've drifted through these ideas with a sense of calm, or found a little stillness in the rhythm of this journey, that's enough. You don't need to remember every thought. You don't need to hold on to every line. Just let the feeling linger, the soft sense of being carried through a quieter world where decisions unfold like slow ripples in a darkened room. And if you enjoyed drifting through this gentle exploration of power and the mind that tried to understand it, you're welcome to like the video or subscribe for more quiet journeys, but only if it feels right. No pressure, no expectation, just a soft invitation. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I hope the night treats you kindly. Rest well, breathe deeply, let your thoughts loosen one by one, and allow the quiet to settle around you like a warm, steady blanket. The world remembers you.